Today we're going to be looking at 5.3 slope-intercept form. Our goals for today are to write linear equations using slope-intercept form and to graph linear equations using slope-intercept form. So the first thing we need to do is go over some vocabulary. A parent function is just a simplest function. A linear parent function is in the form y equals x. A linear equation is an equation that models a linear function where the variables cannot be raised to a power other than 1. So our first thing that we need to talk about is slope-intercept form of a linear equation. Some of you may have already seen this before, which is great. If you haven't, not a big deal. But slope-intercept form is when your equation is solved for y. So this is y equals. The number in front of the x is your slope. The other number that doesn't have a variable, we call that a constant, is your y-intercept. So we say y equals mx plus b, where m is our slope and b is our y-intercept. The y-intercept is where your graph crosses the y-axis. Remember, the y-axis is the vertical axis. So let's look at example 1. It says, write the equation in slope-intercept form. Identify the slope and the y-intercept. So again, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So when I want to write an equation in slope-intercept form, I basically want to solve for y. So for number 1, if I want to solve for y, we've done this before, I'm going to minus 2x to move that to the other side. So on the left, I would have 4y. On the right, here's where we're going to do something a little bit different. Some of you have already been doing this. In slope-intercept form, the variable always comes before the constant, so x always goes first. So this 10 minus 2x, I'm actually going to write it with the x first. So since it was a minus 2x, I should have a negative sign with the 2x. The 10 was positive, so this should be plus 10. Now to solve for y, I'm going to divide by 4. Remember, every single term gets divided by 4. So I get y equals, negative 2 divided by 4 doesn't go in evenly, but I can simplify the fraction to negative 1/2. So this is negative 1/2 x. 10 divided by 4 doesn't go in evenly, but I can simplify that fraction to 5/2. This is my equation in slope-intercept form. I also want to identify the slope and the y-intercept. My slope, I use the letter m. So my slope is negative 1/2. It's the number in front of x. We call that a coefficient. My slope is the constant value, the value without a variable. So my y-intercept is 5/2. So let's look at number 2. If I want to solve for y to put it in slope-intercept form, I would minus x first. So I have negative 2y equals negative x plus 6. I divide by negative 2 to all my terms, and I have y equals, this is like a negative 1 here. So negative 1 divided by negative 2 would be positive 1/2 x. 6 divided by negative 2 is negative 3. So this is minus 3. This is my equation in slope-intercept form. Now identifying the slope and the y-intercept, my slope is 1/2. It's the number in front of the x. My y-intercept is negative 3, since there's a minus sign. So one more. First step, I'm going to minus 6x. So I want to move it to the other side. We always do opposites. So I have negative 2y equals negative 6x minus 12. Now to solve for y, I'm going to divide by negative 2. Remember, every term gets divided by negative 2. So I have y equals, it's a positive 3x, because two negatives make a positive when you divide, and it would be plus 6, because two negatives when you divide make a positive. So here my slope is 3, my y-intercept is 6. Now notice again, all of my y-intercepts I use the value b. The reason we do that is because we don't want to get confused with our x and our y in our slope-intercept form equation. So the b stands for our y-intercept. So let's look at the next example. This one says write an equation in slope-intercept form given a slope and an intercept. So we know that slope-intercept form, like I said before, is y equals mx plus b. If I am given a slope and I'm given a y-intercept, I can write this in slope-intercept form by replacing the m and the b with my values. So like for example, for number 1, I know the slope is 1/2 and the y-intercept is negative 8. So I would have y equals 1/2 x minus 8. And that's slope-intercept form. So I would do the same thing here. I would have y equals negative 2x plus 0. Now usually we don't write the plus 0, so this is actually just y equals negative 2x. So for 3, since my slope is 0 and my y-intercept is 2, I have y equals 0x plus 2. Now 0 times x is just 0, so this basically cancels each other out. So my equation in slope-intercept form is just y equals 2. So that was all writing equations in slope-intercept form. We also need to know how to graph an equation when it's in slope-intercept form. So if I look at number 1, I have y equals negative 1/2 x plus 3. This is in slope-intercept form. My slope is negative 1/2. My y-intercept is positive 3. This gives us the information we need to be able to graph. My slope is negative 1/2. My y-intercept is 3. We always start by using the y-intercept. Remember, the definition of a y-intercept is where your line crosses the y-axis. So it's telling me that it crosses the y-axis at 3. So I'm going to go on my y-axis and make a point at 3. Remember that slope is rise over run. This negative sign, we have one negative. I am going to put it with the top number always just to make it easier for us. So my rise is negative 1, my run is 2. Remember when we were finding slope from a graph? The rise you either go up or down. The run you go to the right or the left. In this case, since my rise is negative 1, I'm going to go down 1. In this case, since my run is a positive 2, I'm going to go to the right 2. So from the y-intercept that I just have, or that I started with, I'm going to go down 1 and over 2 to the right. Once I do that, I make another point. So from here, I would go down 1, over 2 to the right, and I make a point. Down 1, over 2 to the right, I make a point. Once you have about 4 points, you've got enough, and you can draw your line. So let's look at number 2. Let me erase this. So I have y equals 3x minus 2. So my slope is 3. My y-intercept is negative 2 since there's a minus sign. So I start at negative 2 on my y-axis. Now my slope is 3. We always want our slope to be in fraction form because it's rise over run. Remember, anytime you have a whole number, you can make it into a fraction by putting it over 1. The top number is my rise. Since it's a positive, it means I'm going up 3. My bottom number is the run. Since it's positive, it means I'm going to the right 1. So from my y-intercept, I am going up 3 and over 1, and then I make another point. Up 3, over 1, and then I make a point. Now I can't go up 3 anymore because I'm off the graph. So I can go ahead and connect my points to make my line. So 2 more examples. Here, number 3, I have y equals negative x. There's no plus or minus anything. Remember, if there's no plus or minus anything, it must have been plus 0, because then we didn't need to write it. So in this case, my slope is negative 1. There's no number in front of x, it means it's 1. My y-intercept is 0. That means that my y-intercept, where it is on the y-axis, is 0. So it's right in the middle at the origin. My slope is negative 1. Since it's a whole number, to make it into fraction form to graph, I put it over 1. This means I am going down 1 and over 1 to the right. So from this point, from my y-intercept, I'm going down 1, over 1 to the right, and then I make a point. Down 1, over 1 to the right, then I make a point. Down 1, over 1, I make another point. Then I would go ahead, connect my dots to make my line. So last one. Here, my slope is 2/3. My y-intercept is 1. So on my y-axis, I make a point at 1. And since my slope is 2 over 3, it means I'm going up 2 because it's positive, and to the right 3 because it's positive. So from my y-intercept, I'm going up 2, over 3 to the right, and then I make a point. Up 2, over 3 to the right, and then I make a point. Now, I can connect my dots, or my points, to make my line. So this was writing equations of lines in slope-intercept form and graphing equations of lines in slope-intercept form. Make sure you fill out the Google form.